All right, everybody. I think you must be sick and tired of the music by now. At least I am. I should look for a better loop. I was fiddling around with YouTube Live in the background, but I think it should be working on the YouTube URL. Maybe Soha can paste the URL in here. I think it is actually up and running, and there's 12 million people already on it. It's just kidding. 12 people on it. So we can use some of your comments here. I'm going to paste the YouTube URL here to everyone, and you can spread the news on social media, please, that we're live and kicking. So today, another session here on with a digital conference. Welcome, everybody. This has become a really, really hot thing once a week. And even though we're all confined to our homes, you can actually talk to each other. On my end, I can safely say I've been talking more to people than ever before, which is an interesting twist. So let me introduce people first, and then we'll kick off with the first presentation. So we start on the top left here, Celine. Hello, Celine. Nice to meet you. Celine is from a company, it's called We Need Social, and she is the Engagement Leadership Advisor, and she's going to talk more about what she does shortly. She'll be the third one in the presentations today. And on the lower left, if you can see it that way, that's Didier Marlier. He is an old friend of mine, also from Switzerland, French-speaking Switzerland. And he runs in a company called the Enablers Network. He is also a features agency member. He is a business school professor. I've done many, many exciting things with Didier. It's really great to have you aboard on this one too. Going virtually, struggling. You know, we're all struggling with Zoom, but you know, we can make it work. Thank you for being here to both of you. And of course, there's Soha. Soha with the army of robots behind her. Soha is the moderator and the host for all of the chats and the questions. So she's in charge of who gets to say what. So be nice to her. And she may disappear from time to time, but she's always there. She's going to take care of your chats. Briefly, before we go into the subject matter here, most important thing is if you want to ask questions, please use the question tool. Okay, don't use the chat. Use the chat for whatever else you want. If you want to send a message, talk to everybody else, or just send me a message, you can do all of those things on the chat. But if you want to ask a real question, use the question tool. There's also an upvoting tool. So if you like a question by somebody else, you can upvote it yourself, and then Soha can pick the most important one, okay? If you intend to speak and use audio and video, which would be great, of course, if you want to raise your hand, there's a hand raise tool that you can just raise your hand, and then we'll take you in when we can. Please be patient. It may take a little while. When you do finally get to speak, please only raise your hand if you actually want to ask a question or contribute something. You have 30 seconds, right? This is a real-time show. After that, we'll cut you off, okay? Make sure your audio and video is working if you raise your hand. Soha will have a little chat with you before you go live then on the feed. Final reminder, everything you do here is public and live on YouTube and in perpetuity. Right, so whatever you say, whatever you do here is going to be on the tape, right? So it's great to have you here. Let's dive in, unless there's any urgent questions. Oh, there's already one question. That's good. Whatever you do, don't hit the end meeting button. That's on the lower right down there. That's what will kick you out. Okay. We are going to publish everything on YouTube. Of course, it's live now, and on my blog, futuristgerd.com. There's going to be, if you just check the blog post. There is an interesting addition to that. I'm going to put up all the slides, all of the images, the presentations, and the audio and the video of the whole thing in about 2 hours after the event. So futurewithgerd.com. To get going, we're going to do a quick poll. Okay, the polling feature is very simple, and the first poll is this one. That is the poll that asks who you are. You have several choices. Tell us a bit about yourself. Are you in a leading position now? Are you preparing to become a leader? I think this is multiple choice. I'm not sure, but I always forget which one is which. But I think you'll enjoy this poll, and we're going to publish it later just to see. I can share the results with you later. There's quite a few people here on the live feed. We have 180 people live at this time and are expecting more. So interesting. Yeah, we can't poll ourselves because, you know, we're panelists. We don't get to do those things. But it's coming in. So quite a few people, 50% are saying they're in the leading position right now, which is interesting. That's great. I work for a large company, 48%. Right? Self-employed, 24%. Based in Europe, that's 67%. That's a good number. South America, 12% at this point, and North America as well. And Asia, 8%. So keep voting. We're going to do this several times. Okay, on some of them we have multiple choice. They're all anonymous. All right, we're going to publish on our website, so don't worry about that part of it, right? But again, everything you say on the chat, everything that goes in there is in there, and we're not going to do any editing there, right? So it's interesting to see 52% on the leading position right now. On the voting, generally speaking, you have to be quick because we don't do the voting for very long. So there's still 30 people that haven't voted. So put your vote. When I end the poll, then you're locked out. You don't get to contribute. Okay, thanks very much for doing this. Okay, I'm going to end the poll because then we can dive into the first round. Okay, well, I'll share the results with you briefly, might as well, right? So a lot of Europeans here, people in leading positions, self-employed people. Great. We need to get more Africans in here, that's for sure. Okay, well, thanks very much for doing this. I'm going to stop sharing and put this somewhere else. Okay, so I want to kick off with an interesting new thing I've developed using Zoom, who's now a partner, by the way, for this streaming series here. I'm using a new thing with the background I'll show you shortly. Instead of using my usual fancy keynotes, I'm using a background thing. I do want to kick it off with a really interesting video I just found this morning. I think when we talk about leadership, United Nations General Secretary Antonio Guterres, he's going to give us a little greeting. I've invited him to go live with us, but just kidding. He was there before, but here he is. Let's see if we can get him live.
There is an effective dysfunctionality in the way all this is happening. We have not a global governance system. Of course, the World Health Organization is the UN authority on health. They have issued guidelines, but many of the countries have not respected them, or sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. So the only way out is through effective international cooperation. And I believe the G20 can be the nucleus of that international cooperation, aiming at acting together in an articulated way. But look, I mean, this is not only the COVID-19. If you look at peace and security, I mean, the relationship between the biggest powers have never been as dysfunctional. The Security Council has been paralyzed in relation to many of the conflict situations in the world. For climate change, it has been so difficult to bring people together. So we are witnessing a serious problem. And that problem is that international cooperation has never been at this low level. And we need to make sure people understand that as threats are becoming global, COVID-19 is another one, climate change already existed, peace and terrorism, global terrorism is there. As these threats are becoming global, we effectively need to have a very strong commitment to international cooperation and to strengthen multilateral institutions. I know this.
So, yeah, pretty hefty message as far as leadership is concerned. He goes on later to say that we're essentially facing a dysfunctional system. And I think this is a great debate when we talk about Europe, right? Not just the US, which we'll talk about also later. Before I go into my part attaching to Antonio's generalist contribution, I want to say how it works. We're doing 7 minutes each. Of course, that's a huge challenge. You know, usually I speak about 70 minutes, but we'll do 7 minutes each. And then we're going to have a quick debate with the three of us, and then the next presenter. And at the very end, we're going to do all of the Q&A, all the questions. And there's no real tough limit on time here, but, you know, after about 14 hours, no, just kidding, an hour and a half, that's kind of the time frame. And that's already kind of long, right? So let me start here with my part and bring this up here so you can see the speaker over here. So I think, you know, it's quite clear. This is pale blue dot from Carl Sagan. We're now moving into an entirely different world. There is a world before Corona, and there's a world after Corona. And everybody that's out there waiting, basically saying, you know, we're going to wait this out and then it's going to go back to normal. will be heavily disappointed, right? I read up on this yesterday, and Bill Gates says 18 months for a vaccine, right? Other people are saying 2 years for kind of an economic recovery. So you may be able to go back to a restaurant, you may be able to go into a small venue, but traveling like we used to, 1,000 people events, music, people are suffering for money. This is a real deep cut, right? And this cut requires leadership. It requires us to do things that we didn't used to do before, like this, right? This is what we're doing now, right? So we are working remotely, which is bizarre when you think about it, because it's very hard to actually connect with people. Like I do usually on stage, I see people crying or falling asleep, and I can react to it here, but I can't see you, right? So I think this is a new way of working that requires different kind of leadership, right? And I've recently started calling this the kind of area that we're in right now, not the Great Depression, which some people are saying, or the Great Recession, but I'm calling this the Great Transformation. I think we're going to take all the pieces of the ecosystem that we had before, money, healthcare, government, security, safety, energy, and all of that is in the process of reboot, right? Just imagine, for example, the role of government. How dramatically that will be enlarged in the future, whether we like it or not. I mean, that's of course, if we have an autocratic government, that could not be such a good thing, right? But the role of government is growing, right? And this is crucial. I think we can expect that to be a major, major thing in the future, this sort of great transformation of things that's coming. And I think it's really quite clear, this quote here from Milton Friedman, which I don't usually like quoting, but Milton said this years ago in, I think, the 60s, right? Only crisis produces real change. And when that crisis occurs, the actions that are taken depend on the ideas that are lying around. And that's what leadership is to me. The ideas that are lying around today, we have to put them out there, because this is the time where people are going to say, what is lying around, right? What can we do that is different than before? We're not going to go back to the old normal from last year, no matter what we're saying in terms of economic projection. There's so many things, like, for example, once people are used to working from home, will they continue to work from home? Yes. Yeah. Do they have to ask their bosses for permission? Yeah. And then, of course, we have huge power shifts in politics, right? I call this the Suez moment for the US. The Suez moment was for the UK in the 50s, when they didn't react correctly, what happened with the Suez Canal, right? And then afterwards, the UK was no longer an empire, right? And now we're here in America, we can safely say America will no longer be an empire for many, many reasons, right? But for reasons of saying, how did they react to this crisis? I mean, we'll talk about that later, right? But losing leadership, right? Losing leadership on this topic is the Suez Canal moment for the US. And now we have Harari, for example, the Israeli author. He writes that in this battle against the virus, that humanity lacks leadership. And I would say that's partly true and partly not true, but it's a little bit polarized right now. But I do see people coming out and taking leadership that I didn't expect, right? And also positive things. Yeah, but generally speaking, that is a concern, especially for us here in Europe, right? This is the European map, just in case you didn't recognize it, right? So Europe, right? I mean, this is the make it or break it moment for Europe, right? I mean, what we need, in my view, is unconditional solidarity to show leadership to absolutely everyone. $500 billion in all kinds of whatever they come up with, that's not going to be enough. It's $2 trillion in the US, right? I mean, we're going to have to figure out how to take leadership, and the Commission needs to really get on with it, right? And the Germans and the Dutch, and we need solidarity, right? This is true leadership in the age of crisis, because this kind of idea that I've talked about for years, right? This is either going to happen now, which I think it will, right? Or it's going to crumble. Because the Commission and the European government really has to make sure that we feel united, right? If you can say one thing about America, right? Americans usually do the wrong thing. This is what the right thing is, what Winston Churchill said, but after they've exhausted all other possibilities, which is an interesting quote, right? So you can see they have $2 trillion now coming in funds, right? And this is, by the way, this is kind of like, we are dumbstruck. We need to really step this up and come together as a European nation, because in the end, this is what is defeating the virus, right? Global collaboration, leadership in healthcare, leadership in science, believing in science. This has sort of gotten lost in America to some degree. right? And that is the future of connecting with each other. Look at this stat here from Statista, right? 500 million people could be pushed into poverty. This is why I don't think we're going to go back to normal, right? I mean, here in Switzerland, we don't have poverty on in that way that you have. But think about Brazil, India, Nigeria, right? And that wave of COVID is just about to hit them. We're going to need some serious leadership to equalize and create equality after this, right? This is a huge opportunity, but also clearly solidarity over money, right? That's a tough one for Germany, for example, given what has happened in Greece before. So the other thing that's coming after COVID is this, right? I mean, we have to be sure that this is the next big crisis. It's going to be another pandemia. Of course, we will have those, but climate change is 1,000x of the challenge of Corona. And it's right here, right? Now we're learning how we can do emergency things like stay at home. The next thing is going to be climate emergency, right? Carbon taxes for flying. And that is going to take a huge amount of leadership, right? Imagine just politicians, public officials, mayors, right? Ourselves. And, clearly climate change is the next big thing, right, coming up. So, yeah, I would safely say that the future is not an extension of the present, right? No matter what you think of the present as being good or bad, the future will be different because all of the conditions are changing around it, right? And right now, I would say as a futurist, right now is the time where it's almost impossibly hard to say anything about the future, right? Because it's all up for short-term change. Could go either way. But I think we need to have leaders that understand the future. Political leaders, practical leaders, business leaders. And when you watch Bill Gates, for example, he's been on various shows last week, you can clearly realize that he has an idea of what's coming, right? An intuition, an imagination, right? Not just a calculation. And here's the good thing, right? In the world's fight against Corona, female leaders are showing the way. This has been a fantastic thing in the last 3 months, not just Merkel, but of course Jacinda in New Zealand, and then of course Finland, Sanna Marin, in Denmark, in Belgium, right? In Iceland. I think this is clearly showing the combination of EQ and IQ that men are sometimes missing. Right? Women are coming in and taking over. I think this is the future. Right? Women and younger people. Right? And we see that happening everywhere. And I think this is the end of populism, by the way, also as another discussion point. I'm going to wrap up by saying, here in beautiful Switzerland, where I'm sitting right now, my view isn't quite like this, but the trust question is a big question, right? And you can safely say that Swiss people are generally trusting the government a lot. This is completely different than many other countries. Also, of course, because we're a rich country, right? But again, Harari says about this, today humanity faces the crisis not just because of the virus, but due to the lack of trust between humans. And I think this is one thing we have to do as leaders. We have to generate that trust between humans. Right? And that's how we're going to get to solutions. And that's, in my view, very much a human thing. So here, this is a piece of content taken from our latest movie on COVID-19, the post-corona future. So I think what we need to do is reinvent. This is a great time to reinvent, talk to each other, right? Collaborate, to go on with our lives, to trust each other, very, very big point, I think, and to be human. I think this is the key part. The last part is the key part, because I think it is human to make mistakes, but it's not such a good idea to keep repeating mistakes. Right? So I would take this as a summary of my presentation, and now I'd like to open it up for questions. Thanks very much. Let's hear what you have to say. Any questions, guys? Please speak away, or do we take questions from the audience? We have 5 Q&As. You guys want to chime in, please? Didier?
I like the comments from probably somebody from Italy. Women are not taking over. They are more inclusive in the way they lead, and they probably have better listening skills.
That's for sure.
It's not about opposing men and women, of course. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, of course not. Yeah, not taken over in that sense, not in the male sense, right? but I think this is definitely now going finally in the right direction. And I think if every government was like New Zealand, would be much better off in so many ways. But of course, New Zealand is very unique in that regard.
There's somebody on the same wavelength asking you, Gerd, so maybe you, Celine. So the future of leadership is female? ?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think basically we mentioned last week in the Future of Work on the last week's event that EQ was taken over from IQ. Right? I think Einstein once said an entity that's intelligence only is an extremely dangerous thing with a man or machine. Right? And so we've gone on this IQ thing for a long time, but now we move into a world where we have to be more human. We have to understand each other. Right? I don't know if that's female or not. That's an impossible question, but it certainly seems like research is telling us that EQ is something that comes easier to women.
Gerd, why do you think it's the end of populism?
I think that basically you can see right now that most countries that have been run by people who are not in a sort of commonly approved position have not done very well with this. You could say, however, of course, extreme autocrat countries, or let's say not democratic countries, say maybe like China as an example, right? They've done quite well. At least that's what the numbers tell us, right? We don't know the real numbers, right? But populists are not doing well because they haven't done the right thing, right? And I would forecast, I said in my 12 bullets a couple of weeks ago that I think Trump will not mention the word re-election again, given that he has done all the things, pretty much everything wrong except for the $2 trillion until now. And now he even wants to let people back on the street. So I think populism is defeated just because it has shown not to work. But then again, there are other movements where we see more extremism, right? And like in Israel, we're seeing the trend towards a sort of surveillance state, right? So I'm not so sure that it's going to be that easy, but let's take some questions. Or, yeah, shall we? Okay,
There's already quite a few. Already quite a few.
Okay, Ursula Busse. Again, please look at the questions and upvote them. That would be great so we can sort them better. Ursula Busse says, will this crisis strengthen the EU? So I'll leave that to you guys to jump into that puddle first. Yeah? Didier, Celine? Don't let me go first on this one. It's...
I certainly believe it questions it, Gerd. One of the things, if you go back to what happened in Italy at the beginning, when the Italians tried to warn everyone, and that was received by sarcastic smiles, because of course, Italians, they can't even track the virus, and why should we be worried? So these sorts of behaviors and stereotypes we hold on each other are not very helpful. There's also something I'd like to not correct, because I don't think anyone is right or wrong, but we tend to depict the Dutch and the Germans as selfish and bad because they don't want to lend money. What I understand from these countries is that they're very happy to lend money, but not lend money to do more of the same. There's a condition. I agree with you that we should be unconditional solidarity, but it's not about buying out old industries so that they can continue business as usual. And we would miss as a collectivity the huge change that we are to do.
Yeah, but I mean, I think, look at the reality of things. I think if we do not have unconditional solidarity and Eurobonds and funding of the same size or larger than the US, then what are we going to have in return, right? It's crime, terrorism, immigration, people with trouble, people out of work, 50% unemployment in Italy, and on and on and on it goes, right? How good could that be? So for me, it's more like, yeah, it's probably a lesser evil, if we just move ahead and do what needs to be done. And then figure out how to strengthen. I personally think that Europe will come out of this crisis as what I call the United States of Europe, but it will be very painful. Right? I think that whole debate that's clear, and that's going to be the next year and a half, right? So yeah, you have all different positions on this, but it can't be the North versus the South. That is just, yeah. And I think here in Switzerland, of course, I'm German, but I live in Switzerland, so we're watching from the sidelines. Yeah, Celine, you have a comment?
I'm holding my breath. I'm terrified of what could happen if solidarity didn't take over selfishness. The European ideal is such a beautiful and historically relevant one. It means so much to peace and prosperity, and it would be, but it has already been harmed over the last 10, 15 years. So I'm really not sure that in this time of deep crisis, we can see already all problems being solved. I'm hopeful, though. I mean, I want to be hopeful. So I'm still holding my breath. I can't be optimistic at this stage.
Yeah.
I really don't want to be pessimistic.
Well, to tick off that question, Didier, do you have a comment there?
No, well, if you are going to build on Celine's point, I'll let you build, because I think that's then a good question for both of you.
Yeah, there's quite a few good questions, hard ones too. I tend to think that this is a make it or break it moment for Europe. And I would like to do everything I can to contribute to the making it, because in the end, I think that's our only choice in Europe, is to go into the future, is to go united. And so this is, yeah, definitely a point that we need to look at. There's a question that relates to this, right? The second one from Anwar Junabjoy says, do you honestly think that we'll be more human, or is it just a short phase before we return to proper winning? Rich and strong will exploit the poor and weak. Oh, well, that's some hefty question here. Didn't you read my book? Well, guys, you wanted to jump on this first. I'll give you some time to think and hold a monologue in the meantime if you want.
That's usually what I used to respond to Anwar when we did our MBA together a long time ago at IMD. So I can recognize the gentleman there. Thank you, and that's a very good question, Anwar.
Yeah, well, I think what's happening right now is, first, I think we're finding out that it's important to be human, right? Talking to each other, seeing each other, connecting to each other. That's why we're doing these things for free, right? And this is why we're doing things that we haven't done before. I've never talked to as many people in my life in the last 6 weeks, right? And we're finding out how important it is to be human. And I think that's not going to go away. I think we're going to take that as a lesson, how important it is to do something that is not just profit and growth. We're also, I think, the coronavirus, as I said before, is only phase one of several waves of crises, right? The second one after Corona, of course, is climate change. And we're going to have to figure out how to get on the same page, or our kids will not enjoy the planet, right? And that's already coming pretty clear. The next one after that is artificial intelligence, singularity, all these things, right? So I'm convinced that by pressure of things going wrong, we can corral together. We've pretty much always done that, actually. I mean, look what happened in Nagasaki, Hiroshima, right? I mean, one of the worst incidents in humanity. After the event, we said, we don't want everybody to have a bomb and then have 2,000 more bombs. Let's find a way to regulate. And we finally had the non-proliferation treaty, which nobody liked, really, because it was spoiling the business. Right? Nevertheless, it has worked. Right? Yeah. So, yeah, I have hope there. Right?
And I think the future is us and the choices we make. It's not some abstract, reality coming out of nowhere. It's each and every one of us. And who do we vote for? How do we consume? What do we decide? It's our choices.
I suppose to some degree it depends on whether you think that humans are good or bad by nature. I always get back to that same question. And I believe in general, we will do the right thing after we exhausted the other options. But I generally think that we are capable of doing things that are good for all of us. That's my belief. But of course, it's a philosophical question that will take a lot longer to debate than pulling out the jar of whiskey behind us. But so anyway, if you wish to talk, you can do so. Don't be shy, raise your hand, and then Soha will take you in. Hand-raising tool is somewhere in here. I think it's under more, or on the iPad on the top left. Just raise your hand if you want to speak, then we should be able to get you in here. Great, so we'll take the next question, and then we'll go on to Didier, right? So, good question number 7, Christophe Balisot. How do you build trust when sensible arguments are no longer heard? Okay. Yeah, please fire away.
Yeah, to me, the answer lies in shared purpose. So it's about sharing what the deep values, the deep, what is it we're looking for as a change in the world? What do we want to contribute to? So it's not necessarily about reason. I mean, I can have lots of rational arguments for a case or against it, right? So it's more about how do we connect as humans around a shared purpose. To me, that's the key.
Yeah, and I totally agree. I would add that the biggest danger for the moment is the polarization, and I'm talking more about politics than business, of course. And if we fall into the trap of polarization, responding by exclusion to exclusion, responding by provocation to provocation, by tantrum to tantrum, we're not going to go very far. I'm not saying that we should agree with people who are on those extremes, extreme right or extreme left or extreme whatever. But it's a, these people are trying to say something. They are talking about their concerns and their fears. So one thing we should do as leaders, I always say there's a big difference between understanding and agreeing, but trying to show respect, understand the fear behind, and construct with them the way to the future, this shared purpose that you rightly so talk about, Celine. That would be my response.
And refraining from participating in the blame game, which is, it's a high game these days, whose fault is it, whose fault is that? And I myself try to refrain from going there because I don't think it's helpful at all.
Yeah, I think, from my viewpoint, how do you build trust? I think part of that has to do with storytelling. And, of course, that's my background, being a musician and so on. I tell stories this, but I think it's really important that we tell stories that get people's attention, not just on the intellectual level, right? I mean, you can't build trust to making an argument in spreadsheets, It's like you build trust because you touch people in some way, right? And trust isn't digital, and trust isn't an app. It's not a download. It's not on YouTube. It's not on Amazon. It's not, can't be purchased, right? You have to build trust, by creating stories and then backing up the story with good arguments and touching people a little bit deeper. And I think this is one of the things that we are doing now. We're building trust, and that we want to contribute. And this is also why we're doing these events, right? To build trust, and not just in us, but in each other. Right? So that's an important question. So let's move on to the next presentation. Again, the hand raise tool, I'm going to take a look to see if that's actually active right now, because I don't see anybody raising hands, which is quite unusual. Usually we have full of hands. But let's go to Didier. Please, Didier, show us your take on leadership in the future.
Thank you very much, Gerd. I hope you will soon see my screen. Yes, you should skim it. Do you see my screen now? Yeah?
All good.
So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to some very courageous amongst you. Anwar, you're one of them, for joining us. My job has been for the last 12 years to advise leaders about how to behave and how to lead in what we call the disruption economy. And like you, I never thought I was going to see anything like what we've seen. So I have observed for the past 2 months sometimes unexpected leaders, but people who really raise the level of their game, people who rise to the occasion, and who have created a solid difference for their nation, if they are politicians, or for their company, if they are executives like most of us are, or for their family and those they love. And when I observe them, most of them have 5 things in common, which I wanted to share with you. The first one is that they seem to challenge the orthodoxy following which a leader's license to operate is his knowledge or her knowledge and her control of the situation. Well, let's call them Corona leaders, know that they don't control anything, that alone there isn't anything they can do, and that on top of that, they're just as lost as we are. You may remember those stickers on American cars in the old days, don't follow me, I'm lost too. That's their mantra for every day in the morning. Contrary to some who stand on the podium, throw tantrums, have this attitude of how can I fly like an eagle when I'm surrounded by turkeys, and then project a video in their honor, the leaders, those Corona leaders, display humility and vulnerability. They don't pretend that they know that they don't, and they'll be delighted to invite others to join them to the party and help them out of the pit. Give you one example. I happen to live in Switzerland, and I've been quite impressed by the government who rushed on live TV without any safety net, with the press allowed to bombard them questions. And basically their attitude at the early stages was, you know what, we never expected anything like this. We've never been trained nor prepared for that. We're going to have to go by trial and error. And stay with us, bear with us. We will get out of it together, but give us a chance. And that created a huge trust and a huge feeling of connection between the leaders and the led. So that's lesson number one. Lesson number two, they are people with their people. They remain present, visible, and reachable. They reduce the power distance. They are not ego-driven. They fight for a higher purpose, their nation, their family, themselves, or their business. And they demonstrate empathy. They really want to understand what are the fears and concerns of their people. Give you an example, a CEO I have the honor, in fact, it's a member of a board I have the honor to work with, has put on his agenda that every day he would call 20 to 30 people all over the world at random amongst his employees and have a genuine, honest conversation. How is it for you? What are you doing? How do you feel? What are your concerns? What are your fears? Etc., etc. Of course, he will never speak to the several tens of thousands of employees, but you know what? The rumor has done its job. Everybody in the company knows that they might be called at any time, by the CEO to have a discussion about how they feel. So that's the second thing. They reduce the power distance and they're very present amongst their people. Point number one, because they understand what scares their people, their concern, they can address them. And when I'm saying address, it's not solve them. None of the leaders, political or business, will be able to solve the COVID problem by themselves, but they can address, they can allow conversations, dialogues to take place. And more important, they do take a very strong, passionate, personal commitment towards their people, on their people's concern. Let me talk to you about a company that the Brazilians know called iFood. It's a very fast-growing company. I think it's the fastest-growing company in Brazil. It's a bit like Uber Eats in the rest of the world, with one big difference. They have solid humanistic values, and those guys live by those values. The board went out recently and claimed nobody's going to be fired because of COVID. And more than that, they support their suppliers financially. The Joe Kaiser, who is the CEO of Siemens, did exactly the same a few days ago. Nobody will lose their job in Siemens because of COVID. It's going to be difficult. They will probably have to reduce their salaries starting from the top and end. But there's a commitment and there's a very strong ethical, principle-based stand on this. And as a consequence, those people tend to create a huge engagement from their people who feel that they are part of the family, they are part of a project, they are not just a bunch of hired guns. They are part of a family, but it also creates a huge goodwill from the public, from the customers, and from the suppliers. Lesson number 4 is not necessarily a lesson from this crisis. It's about walk the talk. Those leaders that I'm observing know that people don't listen to what they say, but they listen to how they behave, what they do. They know that they are being scrutinized. As a consequence, they are not into a public relation exercise. They are not doing communication. They are the message. They believe into the message. They behave. You know, behavior is part of their personal brand. They behave the message. Very different from the ministers of health, as you know, from New Zealand and Scotland, who've been on TV asking people to respect the confinement and were caught by paparazzis into their secondary home for the weekend. Different from this football player of the English squad who was on TV begging people to be reasonable and to think a little bit and respect the confinement, just to head up to pick up 2 prostitutes on the way home and invite his best friend. These people should be fired if it's not already done. They've completely lost and destroyed their reputation. And finally, I would like to go on the 5th one because I think it relates also to what you said, Gerd. It's about how do we, as leaders, but also as citizens, how do we look towards the end of the tunnel? Do we secretly hope for more business as usual, or will we have the courage, the intelligence, the vision, the guts to change the way we do economy? Because you know what? COVID was just a wavelet compared to the rest. Few examples, alimentary. What's going to happen when the farmers will come and tell us, you know what? No more supply of food. It's all rotten on the field. We couldn't harvest. Inequalities. What do you think will happen when the nurses, the cashiers, and other very humble people who saved our lives and who made our families' lives possible will suddenly wake up and check the salaries of the Neymars, the Messis, the Mbappe, the NHL, the NBA stars, when they will also look at the salaries of some of us executives who were totally transparent during the crisis, useless, and the best some of the sports people could do was shut up rather than show themselves enjoying life and not respecting at all the confinement. Do we seriously believe that we will continue to be able to have a united society with such differences? It's obscenity. Economics, we will invest trillions of euros and dollars into reshaping the industry. Now, will we throw more money at rundown industries and businesses, or will reinvent a new, sustainable and fairer economic environment? Take the airlines. Of course, we need to travel, and I'm the first one. But will we just bail them out without condition? Or will we set them very clear rules, like in 5 years, none of your jets is flying and polluting at the same time? Ideological question, who is going to win the COVID war? China, when we realize that their scientists are prohibited to share their researches with the rest of the world until it's been approved by the censorship. United States, who's completely lost face by stealing, hijacking face masks paid by other countries. Who's going to win that war? And finally, as Gerd said, the environment. Will we display the same lethargy as before? The same lethargy that we have displayed towards the COVID? And it's interesting to see that the presidents and prime ministers who are climato-skeptics were also the most COVID skeptics before it started. And now we see how dearly a price their people pay. Or will we take it seriously, preempt the crisis, because that tsunami might be far worse, as Gerd was saying, than the COVID-19. This is roughly what I've seen. Let me quickly summarize. Those, I nicknamed them Corona leaders, lead even when they don't know. They reduce the power distance. They take a very strong stand based on their people's fears and concerns. They are their message, and they are prepared to reinvent the economy. Enough preaching. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much, Didier. The share, please.
Yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is obviously a huge challenge. I take heart from something that we've observed in this current crisis. You know, we have, in a way, agreed on things that we would never agree upon in normal circumstances, like staying at home or not working or sharing our money or, you know, providing an act of solidarity and so on. And that has been very much a shaping force, I think. And now I think that we've seen that it's possible, right? And we've seen that, you know, for example, in many countries, there is, in fact, a kind of universal basic income now, because the government is footing the bill. It's a UBI of some way or the other, right? And now maybe in the future, we can come to a place where we can say, you know what, we have to do the same for climate change, which requires sacrifices. Like in my case, you know, I did 350 flights in 2019. That would be a huge sacrifice, you know, to pay. I mean, I do already do carbon offsetting, but to pay substantially for that, I think that's something that is insurmountable. And it's coming now, because now we found out that we can do it, right? We have to do it, and we can do it if there's enough reason, right? As I used to say, pain or love, that's the only way that humans change, pain or love, right? And the combination of those two. So, Celine, any comments on Didier's talk? You're going to share the slides with us later, right, Didier? Yeah.
Yes, they will be shared. Soha has them and will send them to all of you who've registered.
Yeah, my comment is that all of what you're saying was already relevant in the past. Corona is just making it more, it exacerbates the qualities of good leadership. And good leadership starts also, again, with each and every one of us. What choices, who do we follow? Who do we try to mimic, replicate? Who's inspires us?
You know, I think at the end of next year, we're going to sit here and we're going to say, these people turned out to be true leaders, like, you know, Mandela type leaders or Gandhi type leaders, or, you know, people who have taken us to a whole different place. And we're going to see them emerge in this crisis. And they may be some people that we haven't even thought about. And they may be people who are not even currently in government. right? I mean, they could be all over the place. I think this is one of the things that really makes me worried, that it would go the opposite, right? So clamming down, but then again, I see lots of good other signs. We have a hand raised, so we're going to take Christophe Roger. Christophe, if you're ready to talk, please go ahead, fire up your video as well. And remember, you're live on YouTube.
Hello, do you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Okay, because I am not at ease with Zoom, so it's okay, I will speak. So I think I will take the image of a sailing boat. I think a guy in a sailing boat, he knows where he wants to go, but he has not a drive motor to enforce it. So he has to build on the energy, the environment, the energy, the waves, the wind, etc., and try to make the best out of it. But then the reward is he will do it not spending all his energy on gas. And I think with the team, I think it's the same. The leader who can detect where there is energy momentum and build on it, reorient it a little bit in some cases towards the goal, they are really the long-term winners. And also is the same with environmental. The countries who can build on what they have available around them for whatever purpose, feeding the population, or even building some raw materials that with the ones that are available. So that's why I come back to the picture. I like this sailing boat versus drive motor boat that is enforcing. I like this picture because you build on the momentum instead of trying to force.
Great. Yeah, very good comment. I love that picture. I'll take a slide out of that or some sort of animation. Thanks very much, Christophe, for joining in. Anybody want to respond? Yeah, Didier or Celine?
Well, there was one of the comments on the flow of comments. Gerd, by the way, do we get also a copy of all these questions and comments from the people?
Yeah.
Okay. There was one of the comments saying it's about adaptability. It's about the adaptable leader. And also when you were saying earlier, maybe the heroes of today, you know, from hero to zero. Yeah, some of them will fail. Some of them will disappoint. And some of them will continue to surprise us. And I like that metaphor very much. You know, it's more environmental friendly, and not because it's a sailing boat versus a gas boat. That would be a bit stupid, but it goes with, it doesn't force, it doesn't rape, it doesn't make a violence. It just goes with the flow. So I like the metaphor. Yes.
So another comment that also was very good. It's somebody said it's not about leaders, it's about leadership.
Yes.
Let's because we often tend to project, you know, the ideal qualities in the leader, right? And we're all humans, right? So no one.
Yeah, I was going to say, actually, you know, we are so different kinds of leaders with different strengths and different powers, and this is why we need more than one. We need many more. I proposed years ago when my book came out to start a global digital ethics council, you know, because of technology taking over everything basically. And now I'm rethinking. I'm thinking like, what we need now is a great transformation council. You know, it's people who are going to say, you know what, let's sit down and talk like the ancient Greek about what is possible now that we are rebooting, and not waste the moment. Like, you know, should we support the airplane industry? Absolutely. But should we make them go back to what they were before? I don't think so. You know, what kind of decisions do we make? Do we have the right leaders? Could there be emergent? Could we have more than one Greta? You know, could we have a council like this? I mean, I think these questions are popping up everywhere, and people are finally open. I mean, it's interesting. People are open to the debate of a global government even now, and many of them, of course, is polarizing. But ultimately, we're seeing on these issues like COVID, and also of course climate change, that either we're going to get to a global solution, like Guterres said, right, or we're not going to get to a solution. And if we don't get to a solution, then I'm afraid that wouldn't fare very well for us. Do we have any other urgent questions, or should we move on to the next session? There's a couple of interesting questions. I agree here with Rua Mendez. You know, we should not talk about men or women. I totally agree. I just think it's really important to look at the history of all these discussions, which were so male dominated in so many ways. And now we move into a place where we clearly are seeing the, the really interesting stuff happening in crisis right now is there. Yeah, please.
So sorry, I'm interrupting you.
No, jump in.
There's just a technical glitch. Apparently, there are a few people who are sick and tired of seeing my face. They say I'm very handsome, but they would like to see the face of everybody.
It's fixed. It's fixed.
And I completely agree with them.
Yeah,
You guys are really courageous to put up with it.
Well, let me put a black thing over you here, so cover you off, so you make up for all the FaceTime you got from people. Yeah, we have to switch back to the speaker view. I mean, it's obviously funny to see that, while we're talking, we sometimes forget about technology, which is a good thing, I suppose, right? So let's answer one question, and then we go to Celine. Yes.
Yeah.
So you said, let's see, where did we start with this? Yeah. So Ivo Knodnerus says it's already clear the EU is failing in the COVID crisis. There's no future in this of Europe in this form. EU needs to reinvent itself and so on. Yeah, I totally understand your message. I read Yanis Varoufakis' post last week on this whole issue about the Eurobonds and stuff. And I don't usually sympathize with many things he says, but clearly this is now hitting home. But I would forecast in the next 2 weeks, the EU is going to make a pivot on this. Right? Also, because they're seeing, again, what's happening in America, they do absolutely nothing, and Trump denies everything, and then he pulls out $2 trillion. Yeah, and what we have in Europe is exactly the opposite. We did everything right, like in Germany, Switzerland, Scandinavian countries. We flattened the curve, but now we're not pouring out the money. And I think we're going to see the EU flip around. That's my hope, and let's see if that comes true. Maybe we'll send them a quick email on this topic. All right, then. So, Celine, please take it away.
Is there one question from Steph coming?
I think Soha is having somebody, yeah.
Who?
Soha is.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, there's a hand raised. Yeah, do you want to take it? Steph Bracken. Okay, please fire away, Steph, if you are allowed to talk. You show video, that's good. Keep it short, please, and to the point.
Yeah, sure. I was wondering whether you have a vision on how democracies might evolve, knowing that now, we go to voting polls every 4 or 5 years, and with the time now at hand that this crisis will probably take, and the years it will take to, overcome this economic crisis. How do you see democracies evolving? Because I think in a 4 to 5 year span, not much can be done. If ever, parties change, visions change every 4 or 5 years, it's going to be impossible to have a clear leadership towards a certain goal, in my perspective.
Mm-hmm. Anyone? But my view on this is that I envision some sort of a digital democracy. In many ways, what we have here in Switzerland, we're voting on everything. Every 3 months, we get a big pack. If we could have that on big issues, but digitally, so we can interact and discuss, and I think that would be a very big piece of progress. Also, of course, different regulation on funding campaigns and those kind of things. Clearly, I think there's so many things that we could improve as far as democracy is concerned, but currently I kind of feel like we're getting a jump start on the discussion of what it could be in the future based on a common understanding of what we want. This is one of the key issues, I think, when you talk about government. The key question is really, what do we want? Not what can we have, but what do we want to be? And that answer, I don't have the presentation ready, but I showed last week in my talk, I showed the American flag with, money is the most important thing in the US economy. So it's sort of basically corporate capitalism, right? And Europe, it's primarily about humans. So that's a kind of social capitalism, right? And then we go east, and then China is the state capitalism, right? And ultimately, I think this is the question about what we want and how do we most importantly get there. I think, again, democracy is under a big test right now. And this is why it's good that we're talking about this and we're doing these things to ask those questions. Celine.
All right.
Yes, thank you. We have 2 more hand raises, but we'll go back to that again later. So let's go to Celine.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Wonderful. So I'm very glad and honored to be here. Thanks, Gerd and Didier. I am locked down in Lyon, France, with my family and trying to make the most of this experience. I'm an advisor in engagement leadership, building on a long experience in organizations around the world. And before I say anything, I'd like to express my sympathy to those most affected by COVID. You know, the patients and their families and workers on the front line and people who've lost their jobs and to leaders in organizations. I feel this is probably the most complicated time ever. So I hope my experience with engagement and leadership and change communities can help. Right. So one thing I'd like to stress right away is that switching to remote digital work, like most of us have done over the last few weeks, is only a part of the transformation work. More is needed to reinvent interactions at work, control, innovation, and leadership, right? And for this, impactful digital communities are essential. And for a long time, there has been a misleading narrative around leadership or even around change. And this misleading narrative cultivates the idea of a visionary, decisive, followership generating lone agent, you know, standing above others through his or her personal character traits. Most often he is that, by the way. And many of us understand the fallacy behind this great man theory. And yet, as societies, we often fall for this leadership stereotype. In fact, in the complex adaptive systems we live in, characterized by entanglement, and that's a reference here to Dave Snowden, in the living systems we are part of as workers, as citizens, and that's a reference here to Fritjof Capra. No person or leader alone can solve problems beyond a minimal level of complicatedness. You can do anything, but you can't do everything. That's it. We work, you know, as said by our regretted Esko Kilpi, is increasingly understood as interaction rather than job or organizational activity. And even leadership is contextual and relational. We are all parts of multiple networks. And through John Husband's seminal hierarchy concept, or its application in frameworks such as John Cotter's dual operating model, or through self-management experiments, practice and thought leadership around networks has greatly, I mean, in the last 20 years, has greatly changed or evolved the way we think about organizations and leadership. And at the same time, technology revolutions have enabled a greater interconnection of the world, as we all know. Networks shape the way we think, we vote, we consume, we behave. And leadership takes place in this context, right? Now, for a long time, organizations have considered large numbers as audiences. And the flow of communication was mostly unidirectional, from leaders to employees, from companies to consumers, from elected leaders to citizens, from top to bottom, right? An audience is a passive target that must be entertained or convinced. Today, there's a shift in words, if not in action, towards communities. It's a shift from passive to active, from audiences to co-creators, all right? And modern leaders actually pull communities together, not around them though. They are catalysts for connection, for new points of coherence, for new points of new meaning, right? It's leadership by convening. And throughout the work I've been involved in over the last 10 years, I have seen in the most successful communities the following key patterns at play. They go from, instead of spreading a message, pushing a message, they pull people together. They go beyond, they do not target brains only, but hearts and souls and sense of purpose. They go beyond messaging and create a space for action. They truly consider people as co-creators, as active participants. They do not segment, but bridge and connect. They expand sense-making from experts and executives to everyone. They open up perspectives, and they release control and create more space for freedom, because freedom is a great enabler. I have applied those principles myself in several change communities in the vaccine industry, the airline industry, and we'll be happy to share links towards resources, case studies, community management resources, if you'd like to study further, or one of my favorite books, The Structure of Belonging by Peter Block. Now, what does COVID change to this? COVID challenges a lot of things. It challenges the way we work, the way we build trust and bonding. And in this context, strong, impactful communities are even more necessary than before. So everything I just said remains much needed and necessary and valid. But what else can we do? I'm thinking of three simple things. The first thing is systemic leadership. Adapt your practice to the principles of complex systems. I just wrote a post about that, so we'll be happy to share the link as well. It speaks about distributing cognition, about disintermediation, that kind of things. Really study how complex systems work and make sure that you do not go against some of those principles by too much rigidity or that kind of things, right? The second is digital diversity. Leverage a broader range of digital tools. Going digital is not just about doing Zoom calls. It is time to use asynchronous channels, enterprise social networks, wikis, etc. for all they can do. That is a lot. Use this opportunity today to reinvent conversations, to reinvent how you interact and do business together. And third, pay attention to the quality of your presence. It is not about being there or cheerleading anymore. It is about injecting a lot of life and a lot of energy in a system that is being cut off by physical distancing. So the way you show up as a contributor to the community matters more than ever. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What will you do, or what do you do now to keep your community alive, to make it even more impactful now? How do you inject life there? How do you dance with complexity, right?
Great, great. Thanks very much, Celine. Thanks very much for sharing all of these things. There's so many points here. I like the bullets you made, not going from the old to the new. I made a screenshot. I'm going to bring it back in later, but obviously that's kind of like a schedule of the things we could be doing. I want to share a comment that we have here on YouTube on this whole discussion. But no, as we're going live on YouTube, people are having comments on YouTube as well. So one of them, Idris Boussari, says, by modeling Estonia, can other countries of the world implement e-strategies to enrich civil engagement? So on this whole question about leadership of countries, Estonia keeps popping up a lot in the whole debate. Any feedback on Estonia? I think that's maybe somebody from Estonia. Is that a model for e-government? Celine, are they doing this? Are they doing this sort of social way of interacting?
Yeah, I'm not familiar enough, but I hear a lot of great things about Estonia, so I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, I think this is obviously, I mean, it's a very, very small country, and it's interesting to see they have digital passports, digital voting, and you can apply to be citizen online, I think, right, in Estonia, which is an interesting take on things. But anybody has a hand raised? We'll take Claudia shortly here if you want to debate, please do come in. I'm going to take another look at the questions here, okay? There is a quote here from François Lavallée, from Yves Lusignan, a futurist. He says, today is not the end of yesterday, but the beginning of tomorrow. And she wanted me to comment on that, or you guys to comment on that. I think it's kind of obvious, right? I mean, this is how I live my life in so many ways. It is, however, funny, I think, for me also to realize how many unexpected things have happened in the last few years, you know? So Trump, of course, Brexit, COVID, and it's really, I think the future is never been less, how can I say, like, you say something and before you know it, something has changed, right? But there's a few things I think that are remaining, but it's definitely something where it teaches you to be humble about predictions that may or may not be as easy to do. Any comment on this content, the beginning of tomorrow? I think it's a good comment here. We have another one that we should take here by Alice Deschamps. The concern of global leadership at worldwide level seems a no-brainer, but how do we make it happen when politicians take easy isolation positions? How do we make that happen? I think this is something where we made it more than politicians. This is
exactly.
I mean, it's interesting.
I would
Please.
say, as long as we wait from others to bring the solutions, we're doomed. As long as we wait for a hero, a savior, somebody will solve that, it won't work.
Good point. Didier?
Yeah, I really agree. It reminds me, it's a slightly different topic, but I think it's at the end, it's getting the same place. I've done a piece of work for a big Brazilian company on ethics because they were plagued by lack of ethics, people stealing, blah, blah, blah. And the short study I had done showed that taking Europe as the point of reference, a bit egocentrically, countries that had gone over the crisis of 2008, 2009, and were back to decent numbers, were also countries where there was a very high civical sense, and countries that were still struggling with the crisis and still in the reds with their budget, were a country where noticeably corruption levels were higher. And when you study that in the discussion with the people, it has a lot to do with education and with exemplarity. So going back to respond to that question, totally agree with Celine. We can't expect others to do it for us. We have to do it. We have to do our job, not only as leaders, but as citizens, and educate people around us, role model, and that's going to be the only way, and the sole way I can see. And once again, I remind you, not fall into the trap of polarization, because then we're stuck.
Great. We have a talking request here. Claudia, are you there? Are you ready to roll?
Hello.
Okay.
Hi. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for this very informative webinar. And Celine, thank you so much for your very profound analysis. I've known you for a long time, and it's really a pleasure to follow you in your curve and your evolution. I really, really appreciate it. I wanted to just comment and ask you a question on your second point on the digital diversity, which is so relevant. I mean, we have all seen to a different degree, from one week to the next, we were all thrown and propelled into all these new tools. Some companies were already, digitally developed. Others, they were struggling and they had to set things up. So your suggestion is to embrace this change and to use it as a way to experiment and to not just focus on one tool, but to find the perfect tool, but just to try all the different things. And I understand that, but isn't there a risk also that, there might be too much and too many? And I speak for personal experience. In our organizations, we are now deploying, and all of a sudden from one day to the next, using all sorts of things for internal comms, for external comms, for members comms, for for all sorts of purposes. This creates also sometimes some redundancy because some people are confused, and so they share the same content on all the channels, via email and on the different teams and Yammer and what have you. So what in your experience, in your long experience, in organizational change and in digital platforms, like what is there, like at some point, like a minimum number, or like, how do you find the balance so that we are more efficient, we are better connected, but we're not dispersed?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Claudia. It's great to have you here. I feel first there's a learning curve, which is totally normal, and it's messy these days, and it's normal. Big kudos to all the IT departments which have enabled a huge switch, like for thousands and hundreds of thousands of people overnight, to work from home. So it's not perfect. Some people were better prepared than others, but there's this learning curve. It will come. Now, if a company has a strong enough purpose and vision, equipped enough people to deal with those tools, I think it can be fine. The risk is fragmentation of conversations, and it's a real risk. So it takes efforts to reconvene, recombine, etc. But the diversity of tools doesn't scare me, because it enables a multi-channel approach where some people will be more comfortable with that tool, other people with that other tool, etc. Redundancy is not good, must be avoided. Posting the same content on all channels is not great. It's the same as what you do personally. If you like to post a picture, most people will not post the same on LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram and Pinterest, right? They will diversify the content. So that's it, and it comes with learning, with habits, experiments. So I think this will be the case as well in organizations. But definitely we need to move away from pure Zoom, presential, synchronous conversation, because that's exhausting. People will die, out of that. It will create so much more burnout than expected. So it's not good. So we need to learn about everything else. There's much more tools for collective intelligence.
Yeah, if I can chime in here, I think it's really important to see that technology will not be the savior of anything, right? I mean, it's so funny. The last 7 years, I get thousands of calls about speaking about digital transformation and all that stuff, right? But in the end, these are just tools, right? And I can use a hammer to build a house, or I can go kill the neighbor. These are just tools. So technology is not going to save us from the things that are wrong. The big thing is about culture. I think Peter Drucker once said, culture eats strategy for breakfast, in which case I would say culture eats technology for breakfast. This is all about culture, how we interact, and every company is different. I used to be a musician and I played many bands, and every band is like a little country, a little company. Everybody's completely different, and then you go this band, and there's a completely different pecking order, and people are improvising, not improvising. And this is what I think about technology. Some companies are fine with using many different things at the same time. It's just the flow is there, right? And other companies can't even get one thing to work, right? So it's all about the flow. And this is also going to our earlier point about different kinds of leaders. There are some leaders that are more chaotic and more inspirational and not as practical. And then, like, Salesforce has 2 CEOs, right? Why do they have 2 CEOs? Because Mark is a certain kind of person. Yeah, and he realizes he's not the other kind of person. So they have 2 CEOs, right? They have 2 leaders, right? And I think it's something that we need to think about, the future of work and how we collaborate. I want to do a poll, and then there's a few more hand raised here. Rod Cartwright will take you next, so please do get ready. We'll do the poll first, and then we'll go to Rod. Okay, so get ready with your video and whatever you got cooking there. So this poll is about leadership during the crisis. How do you feel about current leaders? You have multiple choices here. There's 10 questions. So we'd like to know how you feel. This is actually a very good connection with everything else that has been said. I just saw on YouTube a comment that says, will it be the bureaucrats that win, not the population, right? And of course, this is a standard question about the European Commission. But let's see what your feeling is about this. Please go ahead and vote. Yeah, don't be lazy. Pull out your finger. So we can see right now, okay, yeah, keep up the voting process. So the possible answers of lack in leadership, the crisis, maybe less of a crisis in Scandinavia or New Zealand, my favorite pet example by now. Very nice place to go, by the way. So yes, it's like an island of something else there. But no chance to go there for quite some time, I don't think. So keep voting, please, and I will close that. I will close that and share the results shortly. So 93 people have voted. Keep up the voting, please. Please keep up the voting. Right now is a lot of consensus here. The EU is really lacking. Yeah, that's kind of the analysis of the day, I suppose, right? This crisis is a total reset and will empower. What's the rest of the sentence? I can't even see the rest of the sentence here. So we'll leave that hanging. And the other one is that it's totally clear we are lacking leadership right now. But this is an interesting result, and I think I'll make it public here very, very soon before we go to the talk. And by the way, we'll publish the polls also, of course, on the website futurewithgerd.com shortly. While we're still waiting for the poll to wrap up, Celine, can you tell us where people can find out more about you?
Sure, they can find out more about me on my website, which is weneedsocial.com.
Okay, and Didier?
And there's a French version, by the way, weneedsocial.fr.
Oh, okay.
People can find me on my website. It's either Didier, how do you call it? Middle bar, Marlier, MARLIER.com, or our company's website, Enablers, with an E and not with an U, enablersnetwork.com. And otherwise, as some of you already know, be very, very careful. There's another man running around with the same face as mine, but he's not me. He is the most famous BDSM porn actor in the US, and his name is Mark David. So don't confuse us both, because we look very much alike, unfortunately.
Yeah, how can there be anybody else with your face? That's not possible, right?
And doing that job right.
No. All right, thanks for the warning there. So we are all members of the Futures Agency. That's an organization that does keynotes and seminars, and we can be booked together, if you're so inclined to do it virtually and even in person, if that should ever be possible again. So I'm going to end the poll and share the results so you can have a look and see what people are feeling, right? The crisis is a total reset. I think we all agree on that one, right? The crisis will empower the wrong people. That's good. Not too many people on this. A new group of leaders is coming in. The EU is really lacking. Yeah, we got a good mix of people. I see a good crisis leadership in Scandinavia, New Zealand, but not otherwise. Interesting result. Yeah, let's keep this standing for a while. We'll publish that. And let's go to, who shall we go to? Anwar, yes, or Rod? I think let's go for Rod first, because they're both waiting there, right? So Rod Cartwright, please fire away. Are you still there?
Oh,
yeah.
There I am. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can.
Fantastic. I'm not sure how I follow on from Didier's doppelganger story, but I'll give it a go. And I'll also add myself to the Celine fan club. Typically wonderful presentation, Celine. I just had a question, which is, one of our historians in the UK said there's going to be BC and AC, which is before Corona and after Corona. And I wonder whether things are actually that binary. I'm a big fan of dialectics, and if you kind of look at what was already happening with ESG and Six Capital reporting, it's not as if the seeds aren't there for us to pick up where we left off and to use those streams of thought to actually drive forward a positive agenda, rather than going, we have to reinvent everything as if post-Corona was day one of a new history. So I just wonder your thoughts on that dialectics point.
Yeah, I mean, very good. I think, basically some things will be completely rebooted and other ones not much. Right? I mean, you think about, for example, if you're in the cruise ship business, that it's unlikely you're going to get any reboot whatsoever, right? But when we think about energy, now all of a sudden, I mean, this is a giant boost in the arm for sustainability, right? Because we're finding out, A, we can do with less, right? And B, we're finding out that it's still workable. And C, we like the skies without airplanes. And the pollution is going down. So we're finding out that it's working, right? And we also know that an emergency like COVID, it's right here and now. People are dying of that today. But the next one is kind of palpable. You know, we can feel that climate change is going to go in the same direction. So I think some things will go back to that kind of what they were before, but other things like work, right? Like how we share, how we interact, that has fundamentally changed. My job to go on a big stage and speak is fundamentally changed by this. And I don't think I will go back in any sort of large way anytime soon, maybe in a couple of years, but I will probably never travel in the same way again as I used to, because the whole context is changing. Also, on that note, before I pass on to you guys, I think we're now seeing the end of oil as one of the major outputs of this crisis, right? The oil price is down, 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 down. People are divesting. And now we're finding out, yeah, this is something we have to do. We have to get out of oil and gas as part of this discussion about the crisis. You know, it'll be painful, but we can do it. And that has become much more tangible. So some industries will never be the same, and other ones will have a chance of recovering in different ways or completely reinventing. So airlines, yeah, it's one of those topics. You know, you don't know what to think about that one. Other comments from you guys?
I feel a number of good things are born from this crisis, like the intentionality, the efforts we put in connecting with others or reconnecting with families, friends, etc. So I think this is something that will leave a mark into the way we behave, we interact. I hope it will not be balanced by selfishness or, you know, when the crisis gets deeper, people putting themselves, switching into a survival mode. I hope not. I hope this intentionality that is being born out of this crisis stays. And how will it affect and shape, you know, the kids, the teenagers who are going through this crisis as young people? I don't know, but I'm very curious to see that.
Yeah, I think a summary for me would be basically, yeah, I think it will be before and after Corona in good ways and in bad ways. But I do see it as a major sort of reboot of thinking. And also, as Celine was saying, I think we're now finding out there's certain things that are really important to us, and they've come back into focus. And we're not going to just forget about it. Yeah, I think that is my hope, that we have a driver there. Let's take another question from Anwar. If you're there, Anwar, please fire away. And then we go back to the questions as well, and then we're going to wrap up in about 8 minutes.
So my question really relates to the leadership issue, right? So we've talked about how there is a lack of leadership on the political side, and then we've talked about how there's a lot of leadership available on the corporate side, on the NGOs, etc. I don't see, and my question to you is, really, how are you going to see a change if we don't change political systems? Because you've got incompetence in politics and you've got competence in corporate. Obviously, politicians are incompetent because they have never run anything. And anybody who's a politician only hires people who love him. And then he takes over a job where 50% of the people want to get rid of him. And he's never had that experience. How do you manage people? They don't have the ability. So how is political change going to happen? Because I don't see any change happening positive from COVID unless we see a political change and we bring competence into politics.
I'd like to say there's a lot of incompetence in the corporate world too.
Yeah, I can attest to that one. That's not unique. Yeah, Didier.
Yeah, thank you, Anwar. It's nice to hear you. It's been such a long time. I also think, I don't disagree with everything you said. I also agree with Celine that incompetence is also widely shared in other places, in professional sports, in corporate businesses. I also believe it's a matter of where we are. Gerd has named some of them. I've seen really, really competent people in the public sector. Giving you an example, and somebody here is going to say Switzerland again. I'm sorry, that's where I live, although I'm Belgian, Brazilian, everything you want. In Switzerland, for example, the government decided to lend several billions to the businesses that were just about to die from one day to the other. But rather than keep that in the hands of the administration, which would have made a chaos of it, can you imagine suddenly thousands of businesses asking the public sector, the administration, for a loan of money to read their financial statements, etc., would have been a mess. What did they do? They said, no, no, your banks know you. We'll support the banks. Go and ask your bank. Your banker will lend you the money if he thinks you're worth it, and he will not if he doesn't think you're not worth it. So I'm just giving you that example, saying, well, it's not everywhere the same. And I think there is hope. In New Zealand, I heard now in Estonia, in Belgium, in Switzerland, in in Korea, in Taiwan, in many other places. There is hope, even in the political world. In all the emails, the blogs I write, which are on the stone, that what you've just heard, I'm always impressed that there's an increasing number of people agreeing and willing and wishing to do something about the future. And I think we're going back to the same point. Hence, let's not wait that the politicians change something. Let's make the change ourselves. And I know it's an easy way out, but I don't have a better way.
We have a good comment here from Willie Scholl saying that we have to be careful of wishful thinking. Clearly, I mean, of course, this is the disease of my job. It's that we want a desirable future, so then we wish to create it, and that becomes wishful thinking sometimes. But I think that if we go a little bit into the future and we're seeing the most likely things to happen from this crisis or in general, then we can go back and build the future that we want. As Celine was saying earlier, the future doesn't just drop down on us. It's not something that is done somewhere in space. It's something that we make every day. We want different politicians, and we have to stop voting for the other ones. We have to pull their plugs, and we have to get active on saying, I always say that every politician should have a driver's license for the future. Every politician should pass a future test. How many people could pass that, whether it's their fault or not? I think, Larry Lessig in the US suggested a way of funding politicians from public funds, so we stop corruption. I mean, all these things are and why do we have Bolsonaro and people like this who are obviously not looking in the right direction, not pretty much anywhere, right? I mean, there is something that gets them into the flow of things, and that's something that we can work on. And this is why we have some countries where it's worse and other countries where it's better. But generally speaking, I do see a positive trend. Look at the list of politicians I showed earlier.
Yeah, and I also believe we can also run for election. If we want better politicians, then let's get our hands dirty. But also there are other areas for political action, and change in the corporate world, for example, is a deeply political kind of work, or change in your local community, or etc. So there's not just one space, which is the national election space for political action. Everything is political.
We have one more hand raise. We'll do that, and then we'll do a final poll. Please don't go away. Stay tuned. We're not going to have commercials, but it kind of sounds like it. So Katie Atienza, are you there? You can pipe in and do video as well if you're still there. Katie?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, good. Please ask your question.
I'm sorry. I think I made a mistake. Donc, I didn't want to take it. So sorry for that.
Okay, don't worry about it. We'll put you straight on mute and go to the questions, to the poll. So we have a final poll coming up, and this is where we would like to know how you feel about the event, and what your feeling is about how this could work. We are working very hard in finding a format that will work for our clients, for speaker agencies, for ourselves, and for all the members of the Futures Agency, to figure out what the new format is behind all of that online stuff. I mean, right now I'm getting about 50 invitations for webinars per day. So I'm sure you're in the same position. This is why we're trying to make a bit of a difference in how we use these tools. So again, the final edit of this conversation will be live on YouTube in about 2 hours. That's gerdtube.com. It's the shortcut for my YouTube channel. And on my blog, Future with Gerd, G-E-R-D, like gastrointestinal reflux disease, kind of the same. In fact, I'm the second rating on Google after the disease, which makes me proud. So keep up the voting here. It's very good. 85 already voted. Also want to thank Zoom for helping us with this setup. I want to thank everybody, also SOA for moderating, and all of the great people at the Futures Agency, and of course Didier and Celine for giving this a try. Next week we have a pretty amazing session that's going to be totally different than anything we've done. It is a battle of ideas between a humanist, that would be me, I guess, and a transhumanist, Callum Chase, who is a very well-known author of science fiction books and a really clear speaker about transhumanism, artificial intelligence, also a member of the Futures Agency. But Callum believes, for example, that organisms are algorithms and that humans are essentially machines and parentheses. So therefore, the merging of man and machine is imminent. And I don't believe that. So it's going to be a powerful debate. We're going to do it in a virtual room on Zoom. That's exactly a week from now. You can find more details on this at theconference.digital, which is our new website, where we'll list all the upcoming events. So that's good. You have been voting. Let me, yeah, there's a few more stragglers here voting. If you have any ideas about future events that you would like to know about, that you would like us to address, then please do send an email. You're going to get an automatic follow-up email within a day with all the links and all that stuff. It's part of the Zoom setup. Okay, I'm going to end the poll and show it to some people. If you want to vote, do it now. Yeah, okay, thank you. So I'm going to share the results. So thank you. The speakers were great. I agree. You know, I think we rocked. Thank you not for saying anything else. That's a good thing to hear. The interaction was cool. I'd be willing to pay. Yeah, well, that's not surprising. I think the willingness to pay for events is a different discussion. We've had that before. Sound and video was good, and not too many tech issues, which was interesting. Right? So bear with us and stick around for the conference.digital. Again, next week, entirely different format. This will be a battle of ideas and no presentations, just going straight to the, well, not presentations in the traditional sense, right? And then we're announcing something else next week on the larger version of this online conference that we call the Future Show. So you can stay by for this one. And thanks again for everything. Thanks, Celine, Didier,
Thank you.
Soha. Yeah, Soha, thank you very much. You're hiding there behind the screen, but I know you're there. There you are. The robots are back. Okay, thanks very much for sticking around. So
thank you, everyone.
Yeah, see you down the road and be well.
Thank you. Thank you, Gerd. Thank you.
Thank you.